This is Doc T, and I have a very, very special guest here, my friend, Dr. James Belden, who I met, and I just picked a date. I don't know if it's 2006. It was somewhere in the past. I'm sitting at the bus station at the Newark Airport. Do you remember that? Newark Airport. And
I do.
And
I was dragging my X-ray machine along, trying to find my way to the Hertz rent-a-cars.
Yeah, because they shut down the monorail to repair it, and they had buses. And you were looking around like your head's going around like this.
Like a lost little country boy. Like a lost old country boy, and I was dragging all my X-ray equipment and bag full of medicine, and you came along and kind of pointed the way.
Yeah, I said, "Where are you going?" And you said Hertz, and I said, "You're at the right bus." And I'll never forget because you said something like, because I was wearing a hat with a horse on it. He says, "Are you into horses?" And I said, "Kind of." "Are you?" I said, "Sort of." And I think you said, "So what do you do with them?" I said, "Well, they break them, I fix them." And you said, "Oh, are you a vet?" And then when you found out I was from Cornell, well, that was it. That was it. We're just, friends for life.
Yeah.
Then you invited me to.
Plus, you knew my daughter.
Yes. Yep.
From
John Kimmel's place.
Yep, from John's stable.
Yep. So that's how I met you. And you've always been an inspiration for so many reasons, just your knowledge, your ease of going, your way with clients. And I would love to know a little bit about your history from your childhood and how you exposed yourself to horses, just so we kind of have an idea. I mean,
well, started out as a youngster. My folks had a breeding farm. They had cattle, but they also had bred thoroughbreds and standard bred racehorses. And so we're always around horses, and ended up going to the racetrack when I was a young'un to follow Dad's horses, and loved the horse business, wanted to stay in the horse business, didn't want to be a farmer because it looked like too much work to me, and was always interested in the veterinary aspect, and started when I was 12 years old working with some local horse doctors, and did all through my academic years, and ended up graduating in '64 from vet school. And first year I just kind of bounced around, worked for Dr. Churchill down in Maryland, and Dr. Wiswall up in Finger Lakes, and ended up getting a job in New York, and kind of started it all out, and spent most of my youth at Belmont, Aqueduct, and Saratoga, which were the three facilities in Naira, and stayed there until 1995. Retired and semi-retired, and moved to Wellington, and started a sport horse practice. And just this year, we closed the sport horse practice, and I've moved up to Williston, Florida. And we're not doing day-to-day work just because I'm 83. We've changed up a little bit, and I'm just doing project horses and issues of special interest.
That pretty much sums up all of it. It's just been with horses.
It has. I was really lucky in my tenure at NYRA. We had 3 Triple Crown winners, and that I worked with, and always was lucky. Always kind of fell into the right spots, and the old adage that great horses make great trainers and great horses make great veterinarians. Not that I'm great, but I've had the opportunity to be great because of the outstanding clientele that I've had.
You know, I've briefly touched on that. I traveled the same circuit, Belmont, Aqueduct, Saratoga. I can smell, feel, hear, taste everything that you've been through, from the hollowed halls of Cornell through the racetracks, the backside, Oklahoma track. For those of you who don't know that, that's a track at Saratoga, not out in Oklahoma.
And that's the original training track at Saratoga.
Yeah. I've worked with some of the great horses too. One horse won the Kentucky Derby. Another horse is still in the top 100. And I couldn't agree more. You know, we're just simple folks who are working hard to bring stuff to these clients. And we're just lucky enough to be asked to get our hands on them. And I don't think they're any more special than the little kid's pony, you know. They're just,
well, they're not. It's just that their needs tend to be a little greater, and that brings the challenge. You as a practitioner to bring your game up to their level, in terms, particularly in terms in the racehorses. There's a great song about "Run for the Roses," and there's a line in that song. It's a chance of a lifetime and a lifetime of chance. And what that's all about is there's one day in that horse's life that he's eligible to run in that race. And should something happen, his career is short-circuited. Should something fail him, and it's so it's in racing in particular. That's and actually in high-end competition. But you're right, all horses deserve the same care. And I'll tell you what, you love the woolly ones just as much as we do the slick, fast ones. And it's just something about being with the horse, irrespective of pedigree or purpose, that really is enticing in this business.
So, in 1964, I was in 6th grade. In 1973, I started with horses at, Bedford Hills. Mr. and Mrs. Waller, you probably knew them.
Tommy Waller.
Tom
Sure,
Waller.
Tommy, oh my goodness.
Tom and
Top,
Wilhelmina.
top class people. Top class people.
Yep.
Tommy trained, what was the name of the horse he trained? Not Ack, but he had a Derby winner when he was a young man. Can't remember which horse it was now.
He might have stood, I doubt if he stood in New York, although the New York breds were starting to really put on the pressure back then. But I don't know if he stood.
Late 70s, they came to hand. They came to hand and started the New York Stakes bred program. I think that probably the first of that was around 76 or 77 when they initiated the New York bred program, which was really a big deal because it encouraged folks to foal their mares out in New York, and they could be sired out of state, but they had to be foaled and raised in New York. And it was so it started a lot of farms. It started Dr. DeLuke was one of the first.
Ettinger.
And Ettinger, right? And there was Sugar Maple as well, the Catskill family.
Yep.
And there were a couple over around Goshen. I can't remember their name now, but there were Blue Sky maybe? But there were some really nice farms that started up thanks to the New York bred program.
Right. Yeah. So I got sucked in. Dr. John Steiner was my mentor back then. I don't know if you ever knew.
Sure, yeah.
He's great. He took me under his wing. Mentors are so important. You're telling me about your mentors, both your father and then the farms and the vets you worked with. And
Yeah.
the whole idea of mentorship is to take that wisdom that people have gotten over the years and pass that through to the youngins. And I'm not as old as you, but golly, I'm just 13 years behind you, so look out. So I'm looking at all these guys as youngins too. It's interesting how veterinary medicine has changed over the years.
Well, it has. And we learn so much from our forebears in the business, and horse care has always been kind of a traditional occupation, but tradition stems from experience. And generation after generation of horsemen have learned how best to feed them, how best to train them, how best to care for them. And that's when I entered the veterinary business. We were pretty much at that stage. Science hadn't hit the horse business in '64 when I graduated. It was just starting to trickle in. There were some indications of nutritional investigations and some concern relative to shoeing and leg care. It was just beginning to trickle in. Heck, when I started, we didn't even have sterile disposable syringes and needles.
Remember that? I
do.
remember it was in your glass jar, right? With a little alcohol in it.
Yeah, we kept them in an alcohol bath. The intra-articular syringes and needles we autoclaved.
Yeah.
And little autoclave packs, but the IM and IVs, we just boiled them up at night, sharpened the needles, and kept them all in an alcohol bath. And all glass syringes at that time, or for the most part. And so in the ensuing couple of years, first the sterile disposable needles started being available around '68, I think. You could actually buy enough of them to be useful, and then the sterile disposable syringes came into play not long after that. But supplies were kind of limited, but that changed a lot of the procedures that we did. Just having that availability, and the intra-articular injections were something that was relatively new back in the '60s, and they become so commonplace now that and the products that we used initially, we just had a choice of several corticosteroids. Ultimately, we've gotten into adequans and the hyaluronic acids and some of the other synthetics that we've used, like Arthramid and Noltrex, and the biologics, which haven't really panned out. They really haven't lived up to their promise yet. Stem cells promise a lot, but don't deliver very much. But I think probably they are the wave of the future in rehabilitating diseased joints. And some of the other, like the IRAPs and prostrides and 2-alpha macrolides, they all have some promise, but in day-to-day practice, trying to get the top competitors to where they're going, they don't give you enough bang to really get you there. So we really are still falling back on mainly hyaluronic acid and corticosteroids to manage these. And it's some of the joint supplements that we use, like Adequan or Summit or glucosamine and things like that, have proven useful. And HA, intravenous HA, has been useful. I'm not sure about the oral products per se. We don't rely on them very heavily because of the level of intensity in the competitions. And there's kind of a lack of a dearth of scientific proof, and experience hasn't really borne out the particular usefulness in high active horses.
So
So
what has stuck around? What's like ice,
well,
time?
yeah, well, ice and ice and poultice is great. People don't rely on it the way they used to. And when I first started, we had every veterinarian had an armamentarium of different leg paints and sweats and braces and blisters and whatnot that we put on horses to tidy things up. And heck, when I started, we used to use Harlem oil for sore backs. I was probably not turned out not to be so good, but it was a traditional treatment. Then we had for colics, all we had was Dr. Bell's. I don't know if you can remember.
Oh, belladonna, sure.
Yeah.
Bell's drops.
Yeah, Bell's drops, and that's all we had for colic really until Dipperone came along. Dipperone came along under the name of Novin in the late 60s. And then, of course, Banamine came along in the late 70s. And Banamine really kind of turned things around in terms of managing colics. And so there have been a lot of things that have been useful and a lot of things that have not been useful. I keep a box of a product called Baptin in my office because it came in a beautiful mahogany etched box with green velvet lining and 20 vials lined up in the velvet box, and it cost at the time, this was back in the early 80s, it cost at the time about $1,500 for a box that was one treatment for a bowed tendon. And so and this was after we tried fenestration, after we tried cutting tendons, and realized that was a little silly because what gets stronger when you cut it? It's not much.
No.
But the Baptin was supposed to just cure by tendons by inducing cross-linking of the new tendon fibers. Well, it didn't work, and we lost almost a whole generation of horses because we were treating the tendons with something that was pretty, but really didn't work. It was, and so we kind of went back to the older treatments subsequently, and we've tried stem cells, and they've been wanting. They've left us, and we've tried shockwave, and we've tried all sorts of other odd issues. Shockwave, the only indication it has in human medicine is to break up a kidney stone. But we're trying to use it in horses therapeutically. And it does desensitize the area. Clearly, it has an impact, a negative impact on innervation. But I can't tell you that induces healing in any way, shape, or form. So we've been through all of these things, and in some instances, we've gone back to something that I quit doing, I don't know, probably 20 years ago. We've gone back to pin firing some of these injuries that are recidivistic and reluctant to heal. And we've kind of had the same luck that we had 20 or 30 years ago with them, where we get about 75% of them back instead of the 10 or 15% that we get back with the other procedures.
I think
So it's,
when I was taught about blistering when I was taught about blistering and applying cautery, um, it was enforcing rest. Was that part of it?
well, no, because what we've learned since then, we don't really give them any rest when we fire them. We start walking the day that we do it, hand walking for 20 or 30 minutes. Somewhere around 20 days post-operative, we start trot, we get on their back and start doing some walk trot. And we like to, because we we recognize now the trophic effect of exercise. And the trophic effect of exercise basically means that a body will heal to the degree that the stresses applied to it are recognized. And so this just kind of opens the door. It changes the circulatory pattern. What else it does, we don't know because it predates science. There are hundreds of years of history with it, but it's never been scientifically examined. Clearly, it does change the circulatory perfusion pattern and the areas that are done. And it does reignite a healing process. And apparently it just sends, stem cells abound in the circulatory system. And it may be actually that it's only a way of tricking the stem cells into coming to healing that particular lesion. We don't know, but we do know from tradition that it does help with chronic injuries that nothing else resolves. Excuse me. So
Yeah,
it's
it sounds like the pattern over the years has been, we got to find something that'll work. And so we try it. We find that it doesn't work.
right, exactly. And so we have to be a little careful because people jump on the bandwagon. Everyone's looking for the easy cure. You'll remember back probably when you started around the horses, everybody had a whirlpool or two in their barn. And they were useful. They really helped these horses. And you go from hot to cold, particularly these racehorses. We used to whirlpool them, but I think they're probably more scarce than hen's teeth in these stables now. I haven't seen one in a top stable probably for 15, 18 years.
I've seen the
And
aqua treadmills, but that's about it.
yeah, but that's, and that's a whole nother thing, treadmills. I think the water, I think the water therapy is probably useful. But if you really watch a horse on a treadmill, you realize that they change their gait pattern on the treadmill. It's very, very different than their gait pattern when they're on terra firma. And most horses, even if they're not inclined, will learn to pull with their front legs. And you can hear that actually with their footfall. You can hear that double thump thump when they put their front feet down. So rather than pushing with their motor, they're pulling with their steering mechanism. So it's exactly opposite of what a horse should be doing.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
You know what? I'm going to text Erica and tell you, get some water. You go get it. Okay.
Oh my.
All right. We're all going to take a sip. Lameness has always been bugging me, ever since I started with horses. We'd always feel for heat in the training barn. And I don't know how many horsemen out there know how to feel for heat. It just seems like the most basic thing.
Well, you're right. It's kind of gone by the wayside. All of the old trainers that I dealt with, when the horses would come out on the walk the shed row before they went to the track every morning, they'd stop and feel every horse's legs. And obviously, they were looking for cardinal signs of inflammation, the three cardinal signs of inflammation being heat, swelling, and sensitivity.
Mhm.
And um, we don't have, most of the trainers don't do that anymore because their training stables are so large. They don't have that hands-on equipment, hands-on potential. It was years back, horsemen used to train 20 or 30 horses. The big outfits
Sure.
were 20 or 30, and one or two would be up to 40 horses. But now these big outfits are training 150, 200 horses. And it's the individual care is, and the trainers, when you and I first came around, were horsemen, and they always hired business advice. Today, the most successful trainers are business people that hire horse advice.
Mm.
And that has put a burden on the veterinarians, because veterinarians are asked to make a lot of decisions that really are training decisions, and care and training and maintenance decisions. And so it's really taken the veterinarians out of the realm of just being diagnosing and treating. It's taken them into the management aspects, which I think is a little, it uses up too much of their time for something that a trainer really should be doing.
I want to go back to the whirlpool and swimming because Alicia asked a question. What about swimming? And I've seen a couple of swimming pools for horses,
Yeah.
but hardly anybody uses them.
Well, we don't use them much anymore. That there were two things that were very faddish in the early 80s. One was interval training, and the other was swimming. And I believe I was told once by a guy named Ivan Lendl, that his tennis students were prohibited from swimming because it took away the muscles that they needed to move on the court. It developed the wrong muscles. And I think we had the same issues with racehorses. The one thing that horses don't do in nature is carry weight on their back. No horse in a natural situation carries a rider. And so carrying weight is such an integral part of making a horse strong enough so that you don't have kissing spines, you don't have all of these back issues, because their backs are strong enough. But that has to happen before any other part of training ensues. And so it's and swimming turned out not to be so good for us. It is a wonderful cardiovascular exercise, but we also found that horses, particularly horses with a long neck and thoroughbreds, were prone to damaging the recurrent laryngeal nerve because of the stress of swimming and the way they had to hold their head and neck to keep their nose out of the water would stretch their left recurrent laryngeal nerve and cause a paresis or paralysis of their larynx. And so-called roars, as we in the old days, you'll remember they were called roars. And so it was a higher percentage of horses that swam would end up with laryngeal problems. And it didn't really seem to induce their stamina per se as runners or hunters or jumpers, but it certainly did maintain their cardiovascular fitness. And so it remained somewhat useful in horses that were in stud, because when a stallion goes to stud, typically they don't spend much time exercising. And so it is useful, but you have to remember that about 3 minutes in the swimming pool is all that a horse can physiologically handle. without causing muscle damage. So it's that, and then the other thing was the interval training, which sounded like a great idea, which was used in human athletes. Came from East Germany, the East German research, and people started down the racetrack. And interval training was basically you'd take them to the track, warm them up, and then do a short breeze and walk them, and then do another short breeze. And it turned out with the racehorses, with the thoroughbreds, that it just completely blew their mind. And most of them didn't run very well. Because they just got kind of speed crazy with it, because of the work that they were doing was just sprint, walk, sprint, walk, sprint, walk. And so all they knew was sprint, and they weren't doing those nice 2-minute licks or those 2-mile gallops and all of that great work that helps horses stretch out and stay those long races.
You're bringing up something I heard recently about stall rest. And stall rest has always bothered me. I've never thought that it was the best thing for a horse. And it would cause, it would cause their muscles to just regress, kind of like swimming. They're not being stimulated.
Correct.
Yeah. So I've always hated stall rest. I think bonbons, their foot up on a pillow watching the soap operas, never is helpful.
Yeah. Well, yeah, what do they call it? Couch potatoes in human parlance.
Right.
But that's true. No, stall rest is inappropriate for competitors, and and it's okay to be stabled for a large part of the day, as long as it's interspersed with enough activity to stress the bones, the tendons, and to kick their metabolism up, so that they're actually metabolizing properly what you're feeding them. And I know you're a big protein advocate, as am I. And it's in horses in particular, hypoproteinemia has been an issue with a lot of performance horses, because hay, oats, and water is a great concept, except that the oats aren't the oats that we had 50 years ago. And it's oats 50 years ago had 15% protein, and our present oats are lucky if they're 11 or 12. That seems like a small difference, but it's important. And while we're on the subject of protein, I think it's important to recognize that your protein has to be sourced from various sources. You can't get it all from one source, because there will be amino acid deficiencies in any given source, and the 16 essential amino acids are not present in every protein source, particularly the vegetable sources. Horses don't eat meat.
No, they do. I've seen it on YouTube. They feed horses fish.
Well, yeah, Swedish fish.
Swedish.
I did. Oh God, this is awful. But I did treat a horse at one time that came from New Zealand. His name was Orbiter N. He was a trotting horse, and he had been a New Zealand champion. Came to the United States, and in New Zealand, their living circumstances are a little different. They live outdoors and come in to train, rather than living inside and going out to train. And this horse one night had a colic, and they called me in the middle of the night, and I went there from Belmont. I went over to the trotting track at Roosevelt to treat this horse for his colic. And I got there, and I examined him, and I couldn't really find anything extraordinary with him, until I opened his mouth, and his mouth was full of blood and fur. And, and I pulled out parts of a cat out of his mouth, and I asked the assistant trainer who was there that night. I said, "Gee whiz, do you think he's eating cats?" He said, "You know what? We have been losing some cats. We have been missing some cats." But apparently, it's something they learned in New Zealand when he was foraging for whatever he foraged for. Was he learned to eat small animals? That was
Wow. I've seen some rats at Belmont that should be eaten.
yeah, right. Yeah, unfortunately, we used to keep the rats under control when I was there, but things have gotten a little away.
Yeah. We had a question from Alicia. I'll just read the whole thing. While we're at it, video going around in Ireland of racehorses legging up on hard ground. Is it helpful or hurtful?
At a certain stage in their life, it's very helpful. When you're trying to leg up a young horse, the Europeans always do. Because they stable in yards and they train in gallops, and the gallops are frequently a mile or 2 miles from the yards, from the stable yards, and so they ride right down the road, right through town, and it really has been proven to help the density of bones and ligaments and tendons in young horses. It probably doesn't do much for mature horses, but for horses during their developing years, absolutely it's useful. All the times I've been to, as you know, I used to commute to European stables, and from all the years that I've seen that over there, yes, I think it really, really, really does help densify the locomotory apparatus. And if it's done properly, but you'll notice that they only walk and trot on the macadam on the roads. They never gallop or canter. So it's, yes, and the trot, as you know, is a very symmetrical gait. And so there are two feet that impact simultaneously, which shares the load, and so you're not going to overload any given leg or any given foot if you're just trotting on the hard stuff. Yes, it is useful, particularly in developing horses. I don't think it does much for old horses, but youngsters, yes.
Robin asks, what age for hard ground work and what age to stop?
Well, as you know, with the thoroughbreds, and my main experience with this is in young thoroughbreds. We break them as yearlings, as long yearlings. We break them in September, they're yearling year. And we train them up so that they start breezing when they're full 2-year-olds in the following January. But in terms of maturation, thoroughbreds will mature typically by the end of their 3-year-old year. And so during their 2nd and 3rd years, it is useful, but it's not a large part of their exercise. It's done on their way to exercise. So it's an incidental to the training. But I think once their bones are set, I think it probably doesn't give you any additional advantage, but certainly in the young horses it does.
Yeah, I think as they get older, they also get heavier, which is adding more concussion. But I'm also worried about the soft ground, like the beaches were the worst things for tendons because they would overuse their muscles.
Well, that's true, and the beaches, if you're going on the dry sand, the wet sand is good. I've seen horses train in Deauville in France on the beach, and Dublin and south of Dublin. A lot of the Leopardstown people that race at Leopardstown and the Curragh will gallop on the beaches, but they gallop where the sand is very wet and compact. if you gallop on dry sand, it's going to cup away and add a huge amount of stress to the suspensory apparatus, particularly of the front legs. And so, yeah, it's you don't want deep cuppy footings, and which is why we water the natural footings. We water them so much to keep them from being deep and cuppy. And which brings us to the synthetic footings that so many hunters and jumpers are going on. The synthetic footings are nice because they require less maintenance, typically day in and day out. But while they have a great vertical bounce, they don't have very much horizontal give. And so horses traveling, particularly at any speed over them, will stress their coffin joints and their suspensory origins in particular by the jarring that happens. The foot's supposed to enter the surface and dissipate the force in the surface. But if the surface doesn't move, that force is dissipated within the structures. And so it's so yeah, footing is of ultimate importance in maintaining any competition horse. And so yeah, that's something that you have to be careful of. But the hard surface does help densify the structures of the young horses. I don't think it's important in mature horses, and just good balanced exercise and consistent exercise. You can't ride horses 2 days a week. You can't ride them 4 days a week. They've got to do something pretty much every day. The 6 day a week thing is okay. 7 day a week thing is better in terms of maintaining athletic capabilities.
You know, I look at a lot of squirrels, and every day of the week they're climbing, they're jumping, they're running on the electrical wires every day. No day off. Kind of like us, right?
Kind of like us. Which is a little out of fashion to work those 7 day weeks like we do, but I think if horses are your passion, I think it's difficult to spend a day without it.
Interesting. You're leading into a really interesting subject that I want to get into.
Yeah, that's deep.
Yeah, but before I get there, we did have a question written in the forum about laminitis. You want to take a question about laminitis?
Well, yes. It's 90% or more than 90% of laminitis is metabolic in nature. A massive carbohydrate overload can trigger it, or consistent insulin resistance can trigger it. Some cushion-eyed horses are very, very prone to it. It can also be induced. We see it occasionally in horses that have a significant septic issue, mastitis or abscesses or things, anything that causes intoxication. So yes, I think it's important in the young horses to make sure that you keep the infections away from them, the strangles in particular, and some of the enteric infections that we used to see, like rotavirus, or what they call it, colitis X, or some of these.
That'll do it every time.
Some of these, and it's because of enteric toxemias, enterotoxemias. Once in a while, a liver infection will do it for you, but by and large, the majority of them are related to metabolism, metabolic issues, and older horses in particular. You have to be really careful of their diet.
Yeah, I don't recall seeing a lot of laminitis in my younger years in the 70s. Seems like it was in fat ponies, some retired horses, and now I see it all the time. Warm bloods, thoroughbreds.
I think there are several things at play there. We're feeding a little differently than we used to, and regularity of exercise is a little less strict than it used to be, and keeping exercise is what keeps your insulin levels low, and I think our diets have become very complex, and I think I think a lot of horses have marginal, and this is just my feeling, have marginal enterotoxic circumstances from ingesting dried food, particularly pellets that are not soaked. We see more impactions than we used to, more intestinal impactions, and I think we see more horses with questionable enteric passage. And so I think it's really, really important to make sure that the horse's gut really runs on fluid more than anybody else's, than any other class except perhaps the ruminants. And so it's really, really important that you don't feed them a lot of dry matter without encouraging and inducing water intake. And another one of the problems that we have with pellets is if they eat dry pellets, the pellets will absorb all of the saliva. And saliva is a buffering fluid that kind of buffers the stomach acid. And if the pellets have absorbed all of the buffering agent, but then the stomach acid is going to predominate in the stomach. And so I think that's one of the reasons that we see not necessarily ulcers, but ulcerous horses that act like they've got ulcers. And you run a scope in there and you don't really see ulcers, but they behave like they've got ulcers. And I think that's another issue. So I think you have to be circumspective about how you feed them. That's why we still use textured feeds rather than pelleted feeds in our stable here. It's and ulcers were pretty rare back in the early days. It's kind of the arrival and predominance of ulcers pretty much coincided with the pelletized feeds.
Yep, couldn't agree more. Let me read this question about laminitis because it's specific. Dr. Belden, what therapies do you suggest or use to correct hoof rotation 6 to 10%? Do you believe it is possible to get results by trimming or wearing boots versus shoeing? That is, if the trimmer is trained and knowledgeable. If you prefer shoeing, please describe the process. She emphasizes that she's not starting a barefoot versus shoeing debate. She just wants to know what has been the most successful in your experience. That's from Linda.
Okay, Linda, my experience, or our experience in general, has been that yes, you can correct those 6-degree rotations with most horses, assuming they're healthy and you don't have a chronic system situation going on. If you do have a chronic situation, you're going to have to correct that. But to correct those things is really quite simple. It starts with the frog. Um, a rotation means the point of the toe um, is closer to the ground than the heel of the coffin bone. And so what we typically do is we may start with a reverse shoe, or we typically keep them barefoot or you can start with a reverse shoe if you feel you need a shoe. And we like to bring the heel down, and we like to bring it down about 1 degree to 2 degrees at a time, at a shoeing or a trim. Or if they're not wearing shoes, you can just take a lick at them and bring them down 1 degree once a week. And in order to accomplish that, though, you have to, unless the sole is dropped, you have to bring the toe back. And we bring the toe back by rasping not the bottom of the toe, but the hoof wall that's separated. If you look at an X-ray of these chronically rotated feet, you'll see that the hoof wall is actually separated from the coffin bone itself, and there's a gap between the two sections of the sensitive laminae. And so what we do is we round the toes back and we bring the heels down. And horses that are metabolic, we might put them on Pergolide. Horses that have inflammation, we will use non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. And if the soles are too soft, we'll use either something like Lugol's iodine, or we have a stronger paint that we use that has phenol and Irish reducing in it. But yes, it's possible to do it. It's easier to do it without shoes if you can. If you need a shoe, I would suggest a reverse shoe, and resetting the shoes every 3 or 4 weeks, and let the toe wear back the way it wants to.
What do you think about medicines for metabolic syndrome? A lot of people are adding metformin. There's now these SGLT2 inhibitors that allow the horse to pee out glucose. There's pretty popular in humans now. I can't remember the name. I can hear the commercial, but I can't hear the name. I can't pronounce the chemical name, but they're starting to look at that.
Yeah, actually, I just saw something about that the other day. Damn, I'm getting a little Charlie horse here.
Uh-oh.
I don't know. I honestly, we have tried. We've tried a product called Metabarol in the past that's helped us. I don't know if there's any real scientific evidence that any of those things help, at least not so far. I think dietary management is more important.
Great.
And,
Yeah.
and we've actually had we had a client. I guess you'll remember her. She had some miniature donkeys and miniature horses. She lived not far from us there in Wellington. You'll remember her.
Yep.
And she had a terrible issue with founder, with laminitis on her donkeys. And we were able to fix it by simply switching to oat straw, switch them away to oat straw for forage. And they all got pretty healthy in about 3 months.
Just a warning to everybody: if you put your horse in oat straw, the manure is going to turn a nice golden color.
Yes, it'll be a different color, but not oat hay, oat straw.
Right. Yep. And you can tell it because it's flat and shiny. Remember getting oat straw because we better all our horses on straw back in the day.
We did.
Used
Back when oats used to grow 24 to 30 inches. Now the new oats, the GMO oats, only grow about 10 or 12 inches. So the straw is pretty short.
the horses like to eat that. So do you want to go down a rabbit hole? I mean, you started it, so maybe you do. You started talking about experience and the new generations, what's old seems to work, what's new. I might lead off because I joke with some of the new graduates that I said your first year spent learning how to draw blood and how to say, let's draw blood in every way, shape possible you can. Second is the second year is learning how to turn the machine on. But I'll never forget saying this to Dr. Pendergrast. I think you know.
Oh, yeah. Wonderful guy.
And he's amazing vet.
Wonderful.
He looks straight at me. He says, no, Geoff. He says, I cherish these new guys coming at me because they bring me all this new technology. They bring me up to speed. They don't let me fall behind. And so with his comment, I realized that wireless X-ray machines that run on batteries out in the middle of a field, and you instantly have the image that's 100 times better than you and I ever had back in the day through chemicals, is such a boon for all of us out there. But an ultrasound, we can see underneath the skin. But I'll never forget Dr. Fox, Francis Fox, saying physical diagnosis is everything. So how do veterinarians, these young vets, how do horse owners, how do they balance new technology with old ways?
Well, from the standpoint of veterinarians, you certainly want to embrace technology as it comes to you. Digital radiography was, we went through film, and we went through what were the blue ones called? But we went through 4 or 5 iterations of film radiography, and then when we got into digital, at first the digital outfits, digital units weren't all that good. They were kind of blurgrams, and we used to use non-screen film for detail and on the racetrack at least, and so there were good film techniques, really good film techniques that we had. And the first digitals were more blurry than they were useful, but over the years, I switched to full digital, I think, in 2002. I went fully digital, and it's improved by leaps and bounds, and it's so you have to adopt things that are really, really good and really, really work. Ultrasonography is useful, but you can't lean on it. You cannot, which is with ultrasonography, physical diagnosis is really important, because there are a lot of things that can disturb. It's an echo, and there are a lot of things that can disturb the echo. The analogy is like radar. It's the same thing as radar. You send a signal, it bounces off, and it comes back. And you can make a huge imprint on radar if you take a little airplane, go up 18,000 feet, drop out a handful of tinfoil, and it'll look like the biggest airplane ever known to humankind. Or you can fly a B-1 bomber overhead, and there's no signal return. And ultrasonography is the same thing. And so it has to be used judiciously, and it has to coincide with the physical symptoms. And you have to get your fingers in there and palpate the structures and know what's responding. And edema, simple edema, swelling can look just exactly like a huge tear in a tendon. So if you've got a little interstitial edema, it's not going to be returning a signal, and it'll look like you've torn the thing apart. But that being said, it is useful in delineating some of these small structures, and it's also useful in ultrasound guided injections. And so you've got to adapt all of these things, but you can't, and this is one of the problems with some of the more recent graduates, is they've never really gotten into the Franny Fox concept of using all of your senses. I can remember he was adamant you use your fingers, your eyes, your ears, your nose, and taste it if you have to. It was, and that was actually good advice. And so you really have to take your time and do in horses at least, do a really good physical examination, because there are a lot of complexities in their suspension system. There's suspensories and tendons and peripheral ligaments, and things that you can palpate with your fingers and evaluate more accurately than you can with an imaging, or any kind of imaging, including MRI. MRI is useful. The CT scans, it'll be interesting to see how useful they are as they are getting more and more common. But one of the issues with both of those modalities is that every athlete, human and equine, will have aberrations in their anatomy due to the different stresses and different issues that have arisen during their careers. And you can't rely upon an image to define the problem, because we're all slightly different, and all horses are slightly different in their response to physical stresses. Remodeling is not something that happens to everybody in the same fashion.
Sure.
And bodies do remodel. Bones alive, it does remodel. Bones do remodel. Ligaments, tendons, they all remodel. Joint surfaces remodel.
I'm laughing because I know you've come off your horse a couple of times. You know all about bone remodeling.
Oh yes, yeah. We've had a fracture or two.
What got you up on top of a horse and doing that reining? What made you do that?
Well, I've always ridden, and when Erica was training racehorses, I used to ride the lead pony.
Yeah.
And when she was breaking the yearlings up at White Birch, and when she was training horses on the racetrack, so I used to ride the lead pony with her while she was galloping, and my old lead pony was he was by Tarbush out of a thoroughbred polo mare, and he aged out. I'm trying to think, probably around. He got to the point he just couldn't do it anymore, and so we started looking for another lead pony. And I had a couple. I bought one that was a rodeo pickup horse, but he got a little rough. He got to rodeoing too much with me, and so we tried a couple other horses, and I didn't like them very much. They didn't have any lick. They couldn't keep up with the thoroughbreds. So we called a lady in Texas and asked her if she knew of a horse that, and my back was bothering me quite a lot at the time, knew of a horse that was a pretty smooth ride and had some lick. And so we did. We bought this horse TR Chick Magnet, his name was. And I think that was 2011, maybe probably 2011. We bought Elvis, as we call him, TR Chick Magnet, and we got him here, and he's a beautiful horse. But I couldn't ride one end, and I've ridden all my life. I couldn't ride one end of him. I couldn't get him to go. I couldn't get him to turn. I couldn't get him to do a damn thing. And it turned out he'd been trained as a reiner, and Erica got on him, and she's been riding all of her life, and she couldn't get him to do anything either. So we called. He'd been trained as a reiner, so we called up this reining trainer from Fort Lauderdale, who came up and saw him and said, "Oh my God, I recognize that horse. I tried to buy him 5 years ago from one of my clients." And so he got us started, taught us how they were trained. They're trained very differently, and all the cues and all the
So you got the instruction manual.
We got the instruction manual, and it turned out to be kind of fun. So I bought another one for Erica. So we started doing it together, and then the kids started doing it. So we bought a couple more for the kids, and it just kind of grew into what it is.
It's funny. Isn't that fun? I met that trainer. I went down to that barn for you once, Fort Lauderdale. Yeah. Nice guy.
He's a nice guy. He's really, really, really accomplished horseman. And it says something, that I'm 83. I don't want to ride any orangutans anymore. And these horses are really neat, and the competition is fun. And it's so we're still showing them.
You're an inspiration. Do you want to take some more questions, or you just about had it?
Well, if you have questions, I'm happy to answer questions the best I can.
I think we need to bug our audience. Who else has some questions? Michelle had asked, what footing do you think is best a while ago? We never got around to that. I see that in there. I think the best footing is grass.
Well, yeah, natural footings are clearly the best, but they do have to be maintained. Grass turf is a natural for horses, but there are horses that do well on sand as long as it's pretty snug. The synthetic footings are good for certain sports, but they do come with the issues of horizontal deformability. They have a nice bounce to them, but no slide.
3 dimensions. It's so important. The hoof is so well made to go over terrain, but
it interacts with the footing, and it's when it's possible, it interacts beautifully with the footing, and then also when it interacts properly with the footing, you activate the digital cushion, which is imperative in hoof health, and the digital horses with good digital cushions virtually never get navicular syndrome or heel pain syndromes.
So if anybody's got a question, you should raise your hand or just chat it, or I'll open up your mic. And I don't think you should be so shy, because here's an opportunity for a lot of experience and years. Here's a question. What do you suggest to help a colt balance his gut flora after a long treatment of antibiotics? He's been off of the antibiotics for 3 months, but is very sensitive to everything. Lots of gas and bouts of loose manure. He's on pasture and salt licks.
Well, there are several probiotics out there that are useful. If it's becoming chronic, this sounds terrible, but there's fecal inoculation that we do. What we do is we worm a bunch of horses to make sure that they're not transporting any worms, any larvae, or any ova rather. And we'll just pick a fecal ball or 2 from each of 6 or 8 or 10 horses. and we'll mix them up in water, mash them in water, strain them through, what's the gauze called?
Cheesecloth.
Cheesecloth, that's
Yeah.
it, cheesecloth. Strain them through cheesecloth and filter it out and try to,
Uh-oh.
and my other leg is cramping now. And try to get a couple of quarts into them by stomach tube. And if you do that two or three times sequentially, maybe a couple of days apart, you will re-inoculate the gut with the normal flora. And that's, some of the old timers used to use buttermilk and or rancid buttermilk that they'd sit out in the sun. But I've had better luck, I think, with I use some of the things, some of the probiotics like Probios and the fecal inoculation.
I've heard some people add a little sodium bicarb just to buffer that transplant.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's true. You can put a little bit, put a little baking soda in it, but
Yeah, I don't know what the recipe is.
I don't think you have to. I think you just go ahead and get it in there straight.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
if you're right, if you're using cultures, like there used to be a yogurt style culture that people had, that the problem with that is it was inactivated by stomach acid, so it had to be preceded with an antacid, with a buffering agent.
It's one of those mysteries that keeps popping its head up, and now everyone's talking about the gut microbiome, and Caitlin's question is really relevant, because I think there's a lot of horses that need that, just from stress.
Yeah. And you know what? Then sucralfate, really helps the lower gut by coating the villi in the lower gut, and you know, if you have a chronic issue, you probably have damaged intestinal villi, particularly in the lower gut, and I've had a little luck with metronidazole, but I think the fecal inoculations and sucralfate and things like that typically work best.
Great. I love that. Robin says, here in South Carolina, I feed fescue cool season hay and mixed grass summer hay. Is the endophyte tissue in fescue a real danger in getting laminitis? Is endophyte an issue for a basic trail and pleasure horse that is not a super heavy performance type athlete?
Well, that's difficult to answer, but yes, fescue does have does raise the endophytes, and it does cause some enterotoxemia, limited perhaps, or probably limited. I would say that it probably is not a critical cause of laminitis in horses that have normal digestive systems.
I don't have much experience other than when you get these cool season hays, they are going to be producing starch through the cooler times because they're still growing. And that's what I worry about. And of course, just as a side note, if you feed tall fescue, make sure your mares are not pregnant, because that can get ergonavine, ergot poisoning in a fungus. So you got to keep that cut. Am I right? Yeah, that'll cause abortions.
They will. And again, it'll cause toxic reactions, other toxic reactions as well.
Yeah, she just added 28% non-structural carbohydrate spring hay. I got to be honest, I don't know what 28% means. I know what non-structural carbohydrate is, that's sugar, and I think 28% is pretty
Be
high.
pretty high.
Yeah,
That would be pretty high, yeah. That would
yeah,
be, that you probably wouldn't want to feed to most horses.
yeah. It's like I'm going to have a sugar cookie at Christmas, all right? But I'm not going to eat them every day.
Yeah.
So yeah, it shouldn't be a daily food. Great questions, guys. Anybody else have any questions? I don't see any hands up. And we've been doing this for 1 hour and 40 minutes.
Holy mackerel.
Well, I mean, that was since the recording started, I think. I don't know. I lost track.
Yeah.
But Dr. Belden, you are fantastic. It's been such a pleasure having you here. I'm going to warn you that I think a lot of people are going to like this. We're going to open it up on the podcast for everybody to hear worldwide. So you'll become infamous. And if there's a lot of people who want to have you back, I would just, I'm not going to put you on the spot now, but I think this is something that you've got so much to give that I think, and you're just a fountain of knowledge, that we could hone this down and start talking about some other things. I think it'd be really good. So I'm going to bug you on that.
Well, you know the respect I have for you, and respect and friendship. Happy to do it with you. Happy to do it with you.
I would be so grateful. Speaking about grateful, Thanksgiving is here. And everyone's saying, thank you so much. I'm reading the chats. Thank you both for your time. This is great. Happy Thanksgiving. Awesome information. And it's interesting because you and I can chat and we know the answers, and we've said these things before, but so many people need to hear this. And with the new age veterinarian coming out with their book smarts, I think it's important that you, with your wisdom and your experience about galloping horses on the shores of Ireland and France, I mean, things like that are just priceless. Absolutely. Oh, I'm getting a Charlie horse now. What is this?
Yeah, what is this? It's the strangest times that I had, speaking of that, of galloping horses, was one time I rode out with the set with and the Curragh in Ireland. So we're galloping along up the hills and down the dales, and a flock of sheep came running across in front of us and scattered the whole set. That was with Dermot Weld, who was one of the preeminent Irish trainers. He actually brought one horse over and won a Belmont a few years ago, but that was that was a real experience, because we were on about a 12-horse set, and I was riding a pony, and everybody scattered in different directions except the sheep. The sheep didn't care.
You sound like a James Herriot show.
That was
I'm glad you didn't come off your horse then.
right. Well, I was younger. I was younger.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to coming up and sharing a cup of coffee with you.
Yes, bring the Yeti.
I will definitely do that. I'll have one with your name on it. All right, you good? Is everybody good?
All right, we're good. Thank you, doctor. Stay well.
All right, thank you.
Happy Thanksgiving to the team.
Appreciate it. Same to you and your families, and to everybody else out there. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll do this again in a couple of weeks, and I'll see you then. Bye, y'all. Hey, everyone. Doc T here. Thank you for listening to my content. Would you do me a huge favor? Would you please subscribe, comment, like, thumbs up, and give a star review? However it's presented to you, I want you to do that. There's two reasons. The first, of course, is to improve this product. This way I know what you like, what you don't like, what I can improve upon, what topics you want me to cover. But more importantly, it's also going to help others find me. And by doing that, you are now engaged in this mission of helping horses thrive in a human world. By you helping, we can reach others. And that I would be so grateful for. And remember, go to thehorsesadvocate.com for updates on this information. Thehorsesadvocate.com. And again, thank you so much for being here. Doc T out.